Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory to Jesus Christ.
The title of today's homily is My 2 Denarii. In today's gospel, we heard the beloved story of the Good Samaritan. You've heard this many times. It's a story about a man who had been going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and on his way he is beaten up by robbers and left for half dead. And then a priest comes upon him. But because of his priestly responsibilities to the Jewish people, he could do nothing because he would be left ritually unclean if he touched this man. And then a Levite comes upon him, similar to like a deacon, I guess. And for the same reason, he can do nothing because he would be left ritually unclean if he touches the man. Finally, a Samaritan, someone from the other side of the tracks, someone who this man probably would not even deal with in his normal daily activities, has pity upon him, dresses his wounds, takes care of him, brings him to an inn, and then pays the innkeeper to continue his care. I actually have kind of like 2 mini homilies I want to bring to you today. The first one has to do with the fact that today is the feast of St. Matthew. And whenever we have one of these major saint feast days, I feel like I have this opportunity to give you a little bit of insight as to who these people are and what they mean to us as a people. Well, as you know, St. Matthew is one of the biggies because he wrote one of the Gospels, coincidentally named the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Traditionally, this was thought to be the first of the Gospels written. But today, most modern biblical scholars think that the book of St. Mark was actually written first. Doesn't really matter. St. Matthew was actually one of the apostles. He was also known as Levi, who was a tax collector. And if you listen to these sermons, these gospel readings, you kind of get the impression that tax collectors were not well looked upon by most people, just as they were not today. And there are a few clues within his gospel that tells us that he probably was a tax collector. For one example, he does give some insight into just normal daily business transactions that is going on among the Jews. So he had some knowledge of the workings of money. And this may have been an advantage to Jesus and to the other apostles. But we also know that he was well versed in Hebrew and that he was truly and thoroughly Jewish in his understanding of the world. But we also know that he must have known some Greek, and to a great depth as well, as after all of these Gospels were written in Greek. We don't know much else about St. Matthew, but we do know what his major points were within his Gospel. We know, for example, that he was writing for a Jewish community. Matthew is considered the most Jewish of all of the Gospel writers. And he held with great love and affection the Jewish traditions. And he looked at Jesus Christ as the fulfillment of the Jewish promises. That this wasn't something that was completely separate and distinct from Judaism, but rather it was in straight line with the historicity of the Jewish people themselves. And we know that he had sort of like 3 kind of messages that went within his Gospels. First of all, his Gospel is very ethical. And in that way, today's Gospel reading kind of fits very well with this whole theme of the Feast of St. Matthew. Because what his point was all of these Jewish traditions, you touch this, you don't touch that, you have to wash this, you're unclean if you do that, does not do anything for us as a humanity. That what is most important is that we treat each other with compassion. That is that ethical component associated with it. His gospel is also very eschatological, which is a fancy Greek term meaning that it has to do with the end times. Essentially, what heaven is going to be like. And he consistently uses the phrase, kingdom of God, kingdom of God, kingdom of God, to talk about something that is fundamentally different than the kingdom of man, or the kingdom of mankind as exists already here in the world. His message was also very ecclesiastical at the same time, another Greek term that has to do with the church. In line with his Jewish understanding, in line with his whole concept of the kingdom of God, is his understanding that that kingdom of God is already present in some incomplete sense, and that it exists within the structure of the church. The way we relate to each other within the church is actually very consistent in some little way with the way heaven is going to be. The kingdom of God has already been established in this world. Okay, now we're going to move on to talk more specifically about this gospel. Now, there are several different ways that you can look at this reading. And the way that I've decided to discuss today's reading is to look at the role of the innkeeper, someone who is essentially paid to take care of this thing. And it strikes me the way that this Samaritan brought this beaten up man back into his people, back into the center of Judaism, if you would have it. And he is left at the doorstep for the church, if you will, to take care of him. In other words, we can look at this as, who is the innkeeper? You and I are the innkeeper. We are the ones that are left to bring this man back to life. Now, this happened a couple of weeks ago, but I haven't had a chance to talk to you about it. And that has to do with that physician-assisted suicide of that young girl, Brittany Maynard. You may know a little bit about her. You may know that she was 29 years old, married, no children, and that in April of this year, she was diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor. And you may know that she moved from California to Oregon, where it's legal for physician-assisted suicide to take place. And the question I ask you is, if we were the innkeeper, would it be appropriate for us to give her a prescription so that she could essentially do herself in? Now, I think all of us can understand a human component of her actions. After all, this was a very young woman. A woman who was just beginning to really live and thrive in her life, but who had yet to make her mark on the world. She had no children. She had not yet succeeded, perhaps, in her profession. She was not going to leave anything behind that the world would ever notice, or that would ultimately make a difference. And so she decided that she would make a difference by the way she would die. You may also know that in the olden days, prior to maybe the 60s or the 70s, the Catholic Church frowned upon people who committed suicide. We have a very different understanding, and so does the church, about people who commit suicide now, because now we realize that most people who commit suicide do it out of an extreme sense of suffering. And they just want that suffering to end. Previously, the Catholic Church had looked at this as sort of like a radical denial to the entire universe, to all of existence. It's as if to say, yeah, God, I have seen all that you have created. Frankly, I am not impressed. And I am going to deny that entire existence. Not only my own existence, but existence as it exists for me, in my understanding of it. Because the idea is that when you commit suicide, you turn off not just your own identity, but you turn off your own realization of all that is. And kind of in a sense, this is the way physicians-assisted suicide works. It's kind of strange, but in the state of Oregon, the way it works is a physician gives anybody a prescription. They don't even have to be sick. They get their prescription, they get it filled at some pharmacy. And typically, they hold on to this medication. Sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. About a third of the time, even over a year. About a third of the time, they don't even bother to take the medication. And then when they do decide that they are going to take the medication, it kind of requires some planning. You kind of have to have some assistance. The medication that is utilized also has a therapeutic use, but it's given in 100 times the dose in order to allow for that death to occur. And it has to be taken all at the same time. But the problem is if you take that entire dose all at the same time, you're going to induce nausea and vomiting. So a half hour to an hour before you're going to take this final solution, you have to prepare yourself by taking some anti-nausea medications and giving some time for that to occur. And then you take that lethal dose. Then the question arises, how long do you think it's going to take after you take that lethal dose to kind of cause your demise? Well, the answer is, as in all human affairs, it varies. It has been reported by the Oregon authorities that it occurs somewhere between 2 minutes, which I don't believe because no oral medication works that fast, and 4.5 days. Now, you may recall that this whole Brittany Maynard experience, they didn't really announce when she was taking this, only they announced maybe a day or two later that this had already occurred. Because they could not tell you when this was going to occur, because they could not tell you how long this was going to take in order to occur. So in order for this final solution to occur, this one woman who has decided to turn off and close the world, it took a physician, it took a pharmacist, it took the legislature within Portland, Oregon, or within Oregon, the state. It took the governor. But most importantly, it took her friends and her relatives who would then sit by and watch this to occur. And the insane part of this whole thing is that if we tried to use the same method to execute convicted murderers on death row, this would be considered inhumane punishment because of the amount of time it would take to cause somebody's demise. I do think Brittany was suffering. But I don't think these innkeepers, these people that were part of her church, these people that were part of her family, the people that were part of her community understood or reached out in a way that was most appropriate. They led her to believe that the purpose of life is in its pursuit. It's in the achieving. It's in the accumulation of things. That is not the purpose of life the way we understand it. The purpose of life is in the giving away. It is the giving away of your stuff. It is the giving away of your being. It is the giving away of your pride. It is taking on humility. It it means not only being the giver of love, but being the one who receives love in return. We live in a time when it seems that all the decisions that are going on are being made for expediency. That human beings are becoming as throwaway as all of the garbage in our basements. Is that what life is really about? I think this entire Jesus experience, this entire church experience, offers you a very different answer. Glory to Jesus Christ. Glory to God.